Great. So thanks so much. I think, as Chuck said, there's a really great day ahead of us. I think we'll try to keep this a little bit more high level, since a lot of the panels and spotlight discussions later this afternoon get deeper into the data and all that fun stuff. So for now, we'll talk about navigating the in-app ecosystem. So this panel will focus on sort of 3 points of view: the user, so all of you guys using your apps right now as we speak, the app developers and the app itself, and then we'll go into a little bit about probably why we're all here, the brands that are activating on that connection between the user and those apps. So I'll let the panel introduce themselves as we go down the line. So if you guys could tell us a little bit about yourselves, that'd be great. But also maybe just tell us what you remember as your first experience using a mobile app. Or maybe your favorite experience, whatever, it's up to you.
That's the dark side, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. So I'm Jason Blake. I'm with a new creative and communications agency called Newhouse. We started about a year ago with the intent to rethink, reimagine how entertainment marketers, specifically studios, the networks, all other entertainment content providers, were marketing their brands, their shows, their contents and properties, and just taking a new stab at that, using data, using different ways of storytelling. And what's turned out over the past year is we're actually leveraging our experience in entertainment and storytelling, and we're going after brands. Prior to that, I've worked at a multitude of agencies: Group M, Entertainment Sports Partnerships, MEC Global, MDC Partners, and I know there's someone from MCD Partners here. And prior to that, I was at ESPN, Disney Internet Group, and that actually takes me to my my intro to apps, where back on my flip phone years and years ago, I was using both the ESPN app in its nascent stages to check scores, and also probably using Google Maps, again, on my flip phone to find where I was going.
Good morning. Hi, I'm John Caruso. I am partner and chief creative at MCD Partners, not to be confused, sometimes confused. We are a digital marketing and digital experience design company, working across a lot of industries, from financial, insurance, consumer electronics, entertainment, and just enough nonprofit work to be able to sleep at night, which is quite good. So we've been in business for 20 years. We're in New York and Chicago, and just rolling out to LA because the weather's nice out there. And app-wise, it's funny you mentioned flip phones. One of the first things I worked on in the mobile space was we got an assignment to work on, you just reminded me of this, remember Movie Phone, which is still around? We were asked to create movie phone screens for a flip phone, which we thought was quite ironic, given that movie phone was the thing you called on the phone, which actually would work faster than the old interfaces for that. But it was certainly a signal that things were going to change. When I think about my first big app experience, it has to be Shazam. Being out somewhere, hearing a song, pushing that button, that giant button, best interface ever. One button, gotta love that. And knowing what song it was. I mean, I understand how it works now, but it felt like magic, and it still feels like magic to me. I mean, that's the beauty to me for technology, right? Is that the magic in it, and having to have that view and perspective on it. And also being able to hear and track where you were when you heard a lot of the music, which I think is quite cool. So I think that's quite fun. That's my app that I remember.
I'm Jesse Hurwitz. I run monetization and user acquisition for a company called Jump Ramp Games. We're a hyper-casual game company. We have 4 titles out. We're US-based only. Our games have a real-life reward component to them. We were actually just acquired recently by a company called MobilityWare, which launched the first ever solitaire app. So when Chuck was talking before about 2008, they were literally the first person in the store with an app. What makes Jump Ramp different is we've built all of our own tech in-house. So we have a very, very strong in-house monetization service. We didn't take anything out of the box, so we're 100% ad supported, which is very important to us, to have our own technology, and we cohort, drive different funnels for our ad partners. And then on the acquisition side, we're heavily data-driven on how we buy, right? So for us, buying users has to equate into, if I give somebody $1, I've got to get at least $1 back, right, from a source, right? So we're always optimizing and looking down funnel and using different tools to help drive those users for conversion and crank up our traffic sources. So my background was previously in it's Facebook, Google, kind of tech side. So this is my first jump to the app side. It's been an awesome ride and super cool. For me, I'd say my most favorite app, it's got to be Google Photos because it reads all your photos on your phone, has really good AR, and knows the pictures, and like all of a sudden like little stories of your kids will come up, or like a weekend comes up in the app. It's super cool. So it kind of reminds you of like memories from a couple years ago. Just pops up. So it's always an engaging app for me.
Great, thank you. So I think we'll start talking a little bit about the user perspective, so the consumer's perspective, so all of us in this room, and how that mobile apps really impact the user's life. So I think the first question we really want to talk about is, I don't think anyone can argue that mobile apps are now an integral part of everyone's life. As Chuck talked about with all those stats, it's really stark. Everyone uses them. I mean, I see you guys using them right now in the room, so I think we can agree that there's no question there. So digging into that a little bit further, I'd be really curious to hear the panel how you guys feel about what value apps have brought to the world and to the user themselves. So has this explosion of mobile apps really added value, and then in what ways? So Jason, you had mentioned earlier the ESPN app, which I think is perfect. I can't think of an industry that has benefited more from this constant connection that apps provide than the sports industry. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and then in general, what other value you think that apps are really bringing to the user.
Yeah, I mean, Persephoné, that's a jump right into sports, which is taking advantage of just the overall digital landscape, every innovation along the way, and now it's apps. There was a report or study that came out, I guess, last week about the first weekend of the NFL season, where I think it was 56 or 58% of all viewers of NFL that first weekend watched a portion of the NFL on some kind of streaming device and or an app. So if you think about it, and the fact that Amazon and Twitter and a number of other digital companies are making the plays if they don't already have access to rights. The fact that Yahoo Sports made an incremental, purchase of rights as part of their NFL deal probably a year or two ago to start streaming NFL games on their app. What they want to do is, sports organizations and those that control sports and those that want to leverage sports, they just want people looking at their phone, their app. In sports, the phone might become the first screen instead of the second screen. So if you think about all the sports fans playing fantasy, and now with legalized sports gambling in a number of states, with DraftKings, FanDuel, William Hill, PointsBets, you name it, there's going to be more and more of that. There's going to be it's a proliferation of the rights amplification, but then on top of it, you have new media companies that are starting natively as apps. So you have Overtime, which started as high school and street basketball, and I heard someone say yesterday that they have over 50 million viewers and fans. You have The Athletic, which is started as a native app. They have a desktop application as well, but you're going to see more and more of these content companies and sports-related rights holders going app first. Again, I think that eventually, the mobile phone will be the first screen and not the second screen.
Great. Yeah, happy to go down the line, but I definitely want to make sure that we kind of flip the script on the game and talk a little bit more about casual gaming. So Jesse, especially from the jump ramp side, I'd be curious to hear about the value that we see being added from more of a casual gaming aspect as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting in our sector. There's two verticals, right? Hyper casual and casual. Hyper casual games are more of what we do, which is kind of snackable games. Consumers come in, usually 2-3 sessions a day. They may spend 20 minutes a session. They kind of constantly pick up the phone and do this, right? Casual games are more like the Fortnites of the world, right? Where users get very immersed and they're longer times. So there's this push and pull in our industry now of hyper casual. Everyone's always concerned about losing their user to the casual side, right? Because they get much more engaged. So the way we operate is that it's always about bringing new content in, right? Like you come out, you you drive a user through a funnel, through an acquisition source. Sometimes they come in organic, but then the messaging has to stick. They have to play. You have to bring them back in every day. There's lots of apps in our vertical that do pretty much similar things that we do, right? And they're always, targeting our users. We're targeting their users, right? It's a big game of trying to bring everybody over. But once you kind of understand the flow and the funnel and how those users operate, you A/B test constantly, drive different cohorts. You can see where parts of your game are sticky. And once those are sticky moments, you kind of launch and you say, okay, well, we'll bake this into the app, right? But at any time, I think we could have 2 to 4 experiments running at all times, right? So we're always iterating and iterating on experiments. We put releases out every 2 weeks. So it's highly competitive. You have to keep your users engaged. You need to get your ROAS. So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar, but when you pay for a user, they have to pay back, right? Otherwise, it doesn't work for an app company. So we have a D30 metric we measure on. D30 means that user has to, within day 30 of their playing, pay back 100% of what we spent on ad spend, right? So these are metrics you look at, you want to retain, and obviously check out different sources to drive higher retaining users.
Cool. John, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that. That was pretty running the gamut. It was great.
I'm just obsessed with hyper casual. I haven't heard that. I want to be like a hyper casual creative director. I think that's great.
You can pull it off.
Yeah, thanks. I think from the app perspective, the only thing I would say when you're talking about the value of apps, I think from an experience perspective, is just from design, different than other digital media, there's a certain simplicity to it, right? Because we were talking about Shazam before. I mean, it's the one button interface, right? And it's not just that. It's, you can control your design environment to the thing you're trying to do, but then it's also connected to the cloud. You were talking about Google Photos. Yeah, I mean, that organizes everything. It's going to, I wouldn't say it's going to replace memory, but sometimes it seems like it has. Any receipt you don't want to lose or things like that, you photograph it, then you can search it. It's looking in and it's searching for, through the visuals, to pull out receipts you're looking for, different sort of things as well. So, there's a value with the apps, not just in the design, but it's connected to the cloud and all of your data and those sorts of things, which I think is really advancing things. So it's not as much just on your mobile device, but connecting across the whole, your whole digital life, which I think is a real power for a positive user experience and just staying organized for hyper casual people like us, right?
Great. So I'd love to kind of flip that on its head and talk a little bit about the negative impact of apps. So probably not what you guys thought we were going to talk about today at this in-app marketing conference. But I do think it's really interesting. When apps first came out, a lot of the messaging around it was about productivity and how apps can help us be a little bit more efficient and do what we're trying to do anyways, but faster. So there's a lot of thought leaders out there, the likes of Cal Newport with digital minimalism, et cetera, that really think that the proliferation, of mobile apps has actually done the opposite and made us highly inefficient. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your point of view on that. John, you mentioned Movie Phone earlier, and the fact that you've been able to see this process and see mobile apps from the backside over quite a range of time. So yeah, I'd love to hear how you think that's unfolded from the back and over the years.
It's a tricky one, right? That's like, are we being productive with our technology or not? Clearly, you must have met my wife, who buys every book that's out there about, the dangers of technology, and she'll leave them around the house, and I'll be like, you do know what we do for a living here, right? It's
Does she buy the digital version of those books?
Of course not. You got to come over. It's all books everywhere. But there are some serious arguments being made, and we have to pay attention to it. Technology is advancing so fast. It's coming at us so quickly, and we're not able to adapt to it, and the rate of change is accelerating. So it is coming at us quickly, and there are serious questions being asked about it. But on the flip side, we were talking, when we all met earlier today, we were talking about our families. If you start explaining the good old days to your children, you realize how much time we used to waste, right? I'm sorry, I'm so much more productive with, a mobile device. You explain to your children, you say, oh, back in the day, my brother and sister, I would pile into the car with grandma and grandpa, and we'd go and get lost. Remember getting lost? We drive around, right? Grandma would be like, why don't you pull over, Henry? He'd be like, oh, I got it. And you'd just be gone. And the kids are like, that's so stupid. Because, they're used to having a device where you could always know where you are. I don't miss being lost. You think about how much time you wasted. Think about how much time you spent searching for something, right? Think about how you organized your time here. Did you book a car? Did you get in advance? Did you really know where the address was beforehand? Did you just tap a button in whatever you were in? The car got there. How are you going to get back? Are you worried about it? Have you planned it? So you're spending your time differently. So there are serious technology questions about it, and you have to take it serious. But I think from a productivity standpoint, I'd be a mess without technology right now. So I do think it does help us be productive. I think from apps and app development as well, and the way we work, the tools that we can use now, can just advance us so much further. You think about creating content, creating a prototype. You can develop your first version, a visual of your thing, get it in front of customers, get feedback on it before spending 6 months trying to prototype something and get it out there. So it is moving fast. So there is a lot of productivity to it. I don't want to downplay the negatives of, and the criticism of, how technology is working against us. Anybody who's got children, particularly in middle school and social media, those are certainly serious things to look at. But I do think from a productivity standpoint, technology is advancing us. It's just something we have to keep an eye on for sure.
But on that point, it seems like our kids are all around the same age. My son can't live without his Amazon app. And at first I was a little worried that he thought that, even though we've taken him plenty of malls because we live in Jersey, I thought that he was gonna think everything is on Amazon, right? It was a big kind of a light bulb that went off and hit his head, and I guess my wife and my heads the other day when he was trying to find something for school on Amazon and couldn't find it, whether they were sold out or whatever. And he reported to us when we got home that night, did you know you could also buy something on staples.com? And so I think that at first my fear is that it would teach them not to be as resourceful as we had to be, when we were doing everything, with on unpaved roads and without running water, right? But I actually see it as it's teaching them how to be more resourceful, more quickly, and the fact that apps from a user experience, it's a much cleaner interface. It's once they figure out where they're going to go there.
Yeah, and I guess, Jesse, to take this a step further, I'd love to hear from your point. Does this even matter? Do apps have to be productive? You were talking more about the hyper-casual gamer or not hyper-casual gamer, and the purpose of games doesn't necessarily mean productivity, so does this even matter?
Well, other people's loss of productivity equals ad revenue for me, so I'm okay with that in some sense of it. Listen, I think it's anything in moderation, right? And games and whether they're hyper casual or casual, they're meant to give you escape, right? And it's meant to take away and give you some enjoyment in your life. And yes, listen, let's be straight up here. All games are developed to get you to fiend more, right? Like every game is well thought out where they are trying to get you to that next level, right? Like they'll know when to give you that extra free man on the house because they think they can get you to that 2 more levels when you actually buy something, right? Like games, there's a lot of thought that goes into this. But I think everything within moderation, it's good, right? And we all talked about our kids up here, and me being in the mobile game industry, it's kind of like, well, when I tell my kid not to play a mobile game, it's like, well, Daddy, that's your job, right? So there's a push and pull, but I know how to regulate it, and we're very careful on how much we expose. We do want to get him out on those unpaved roads, and we make sure he's fully active. And our younger son, same deal, right? They're pulling milk carts to school both ways, and we got him working. But no, there are potential underlying brain-changing moments within apps. It's how you use them. It's how you enjoy them, right? And I think with anything, there's a way, and there's a way to do it responsibly, and you should not let your kids or you play from them for some odd reason. Like, don't be concerned. Just be aware, right?
Great. So I think we'll probably move into the next point of view, which is really from the point of view of the apps themselves and the app developers. So my first question for you guys is, for myself, thinking back 2 or 3 years ago, I would never really imagine holding up my iPhone to a credit card reader because that makes no sense at all. But now I do that almost every day. It's awful. Pret is benefiting a lot from me. But my question here really is, if we're going to develop an app in this day and age, it seems like everyone can do it and does do it with that number of people that are developing apps. But how do we actually do it well? And more specifically, should we be thinking about this from the point of view of designing for user experience or designing to encourage people to adopt a new behavior or something in between? John, I see you nodding. I'd love to hear from your point of view, having designed many apps and interfaces over the years. Which should we be doing and when?
Both. I mean, that's the trick. If they're not aligned, you're not going to get there, right? So, a lot of times, we talk a lot about convention in design. If you're trying to get a user to do something, if they recognize the pattern, right, don't invent a new one, right? So you want the user to be able to do something, recognize how to use something, get through it quickly. So you don't always want to just breakthrough innovation for something as a simple task, because we need to get them to get to the next step in this really quickly, sort of thing. That said, driving new behaviors when you do find new solutions for things, can be exciting. You think about, and the issue I always find with that as well, we always talk to our clients about, is that customer expectations are just accelerated. The minute you're able to do something on one app, you expect it from all the brands in your lives. I mean, one thing I think, so mobile, anybody here deposit a check at the bank? Or do you use the mobile apps now, right? So the mobile app came out. I think USAA developed it. Don't quote me on that. Who's recording this? But I think they developed it for soldiers overseas, which was a great innovation. And then all the rest of the banks copied it to take your picture through the app. And then once you do that, you expect it everywhere, and then you move on, So, there are what you should be looking for to solve new problems, but from the perspective of not designing something differently or creating a new pattern, but to make something easier that you don't have to do in an old way anymore. So it's really a matter of applying the right sort of thinking to the right situation. I think then just trailblazing and doing new things.
Yeah, great. And Jason, I know Newhouse touts a lot of experience in terms of telling a story to actually drive engagement. How do we tell a story to actually encourage people to adopt this new behavior to start with?
Well, I think it's a mix of getting them to adopt a new behavior, but also seeing what behaviors, we want to blend into, because we're all moving so fast. Chuck showed the numbers of the millions and billions of app downloads. There's a stat that, only so many of them are, used more than once, right? So to get an app up there, you want to make sure that it's, we're working with one of our clients right now outside of the entertainment business, which is a dog treat company. It's actually a very interesting company that's been around for about 17 years, and they've been a mix of brick and mortar and very, very basic D2C online. And so we walked them through a process, from a discovery standpoint, and how to reach their consumers, right? And just because I like to do this and the client seems to always nod and smile when I do something like this, I put A up there and I said, all right, you want to give people access to something that they can't get otherwise, right? Put the P up there, you want to have portability, so they have a retail experience. You want to bring the retail experience to them, make the retail experience portable. And then if you look at what a Sephora, Home Depot, a number of other, big retailers have done successfully with apps, is not just bringing the experience to the user, but bringing the user more into the experience themselves. So I'm not sure if that was too esoteric even for myself. And then I put the third P up there, which is personalization, right? So if we can figure out how to personalize the experience, and a lot of brands do this with their apps, Bear Burger, which I candidly was not a app downloader of that. I did it this morning when I got here because he's going to be here. First thing I see right there is it's getting me into their loyalty program. So I think that, again, the personalization, creating the portable experience, so that way the user could be part of it and the brand could be part of the user's life, and then giving them access, whether it's unique content, whether it's, even from a gaming perspective, giving them access to some free lives, some free gems, whatever it is. I think that's, just very top line, the key to building apps.
Yeah, I would also just want to jump. I think understanding the functionality of the app is super important. You have to think about how a user is going to actually go through and engage, and they're not as intuitive to build sometimes as you may think. If you look at the web, when you search, you put a product in, it goes to that landing page, right, or it goes to that part of content. In apps, that's not intuitive to an app. You have to look at different ways of deep linking or getting a user through, and those are super important, because if the user comes in and it could be the coolest looking app and it could have all this crazy technology, it could be AR and put it up to this picture and does this or that, but if there's no functionality and users don't know how to get around it, they'll drop it, right? Like you have a very, very short window of retaining that user, and if they don't take it on, it's going to the back of the phone, and once it hits the back of the phone, it never comes back.
So that actually tailspins perfectly into my next question. It's like you knew what I was going to say. But Jesse, we had a great conversation last week about this, and you mentioned it earlier as well, which is when people are creating apps, what exactly is their objective? Is it quantity or is it quality? And you mentioned both earlier and last week that there's been a really big shift in the industry from trying to really focus on installs into more meaningful metrics. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and what we think spurred that? Is it from the user perspective? Is it from the brand perspective? What's driving it?
Yeah, it's become really interesting. Past 8 months, we also run a direct sales business for our advertisers. We help other app companies drive installs through our app as well. And we saw the model shifting from what's really a purebred CPI, where somebody would say, hey, I'm going to give you on Android, $7 to drive an install of my game, right? It's a nice bounty to receive. That was, a year ago. They were all over this. You had tons and tons of public app developers coming in. Now they're coming in and saying, I don't want to give you that $7 anymore. I want to really give you something closer to $4, right? But I'll give you a little bit of a bounty if you can drive my user down funnel. What I mean by that is they'll give us goals, and we get post-back data from them. We actually get data that shows where that user we drove is in funnel in that app, and we're able to remessage and retarget that user inside of our app with different techniques to get that and offerings to get that user to actually play further down funnel in our partner apps, right? And that's how we're getting measured now based upon quality, not just quantity, right? So they're not saying I want 5,000 installs a day. They want 5,000 quality installs a day, which really has shifted the game differently. They're willing to pay a higher bounty, so where before that $7 install could suddenly become a $15 or $20 bounty if you can get the user through certain touch points in their app, they are willing to pay up, right? So CPI is now going more to a CPA, CPE type offering. And the other thing to take a look at is the big thing in the market's fraud, right? You got to really understand the users coming in, make sure they're real users. We've built our own fraud systems in-house. We use some out-of-the-box stuff as well. I think right now, from when we're buying from our traffic sources, I'd say we claw back another 5 to 10% every month from our traffic sources on fraud we found within our app, right? In our own sensors, not stuff that got caught. That's on top of what's already got caught coming into the app. So we take it very seriously. Those are things as well, when you're looking at quality, you don't want a bot, right? You don't want to be just buying bot traffic, and that really doesn't matriculate into any real revenue. So those are things we look at. Know your numbers, like you have to go through them every morning. We sit there for an hour and a half every morning going through every set of numbers, retention, quality, traffic sources, and we optimize out that day, right? So we optimize every single day based upon the previous day.
Great. So I think we're going to move into the third perspective that we want to talk about today, which is really, again, why we're all here. So brands, from a brand perspective, how do we integrate? How do we leverage, apps to connect with these users? And I think the first question that we want to ask is this relevant for my brand? Is in-app marketing relevant for my brand? So there's a lot of brands out there that either still don't have apps or have ones that are just awful. So from that perspective, do we feel like these brands should still play in this space, or is there an opportunity for them? I have a feeling you guys probably all have something to say, but I think if we start from the left side with Jesse, it'd be great to hear examples of how brands have activated with Jump Ramp and either done this successfully or maybe not.
Yeah, so we ran a campaign for, I'm not sure I can talk about it. We'll just call it a ride-hailing company, right? There's newer ones out there, so it's one of the ride-sharing companies. They needed users who had previously installed their app, used it, but hadn't opened it for 30 days, and who had a competing app on their device. Since we're an app, we can see a lot of that in our ecosystem. We can see on device. We know, okay, there's a partner app for this company. We used deep linking technology in our app where we did mention we give rewards, and we'd say to the user, hey, we'd pop up this icon suddenly for them because we knew they were in that funnel of users who had the app but hadn't taken a ride from that company in 30 days. An icon would pop up with that logo. We'd say, hey, book your ride through us. We'll give you 5,000 tokens for booking your ride. So this is an action they were probably going to do anyway. They wanted to book a ride, but they got 5,000 tokens from us, and that they can use in our app for us to book that ride, right? We get paid a bounty from that partner. They get to bring back a user that may have churned potentially into their app, right? So that's a good user experience. The user got something positive from me, got a nice ride from them, and they actually start to learn where they can come to my app and book and do other things. You can shop, you can purchase from our app, we can reward out, we do a lot of stuff with large retailers as well. So it's these types of executions, I think, that you're looking for.
Do you guys have anything to add? I think it'd also be interesting to hear if you have any experience working with clients that just, don't want to drive to their app at all or don't even have an app, but how they might have activated within the mobile space and specifically, obviously, in-app.
So it's interesting. So to Jesse's point, in terms of, being very data-driven, right? So we're working right now. We've been doing a lot of research on behalf of one of our movie studio clients, and they don't necessarily want, not every movie has an app, right? They have websites and they have Fandango. So we've been toying around with a lot of different ideas of how to for in-app advertising, to be able to feed whether it's teaser, trailer content or exclusive content, and that's great. But you need to be very driven in terms of who you're sending that out to. So we've been working with a geoframing technology company, which takes geofencing to the next level, right? Where with geoframing, I'm not sure, is anyone familiar with geoframing? So geoframing, so geofencing, you could hit someone with a message within a, square mile area or within a certain, neighborhood, and that's been working for a lot of brands, especially retailers and then manufacturer brands that will sell at certain retailers. What geoframing does is it really is Big Brother. So it is tracking everything you do. So what we're doing is we have one of our film studios where they have a very highbrow comedy. They want to reach an affluent audience. And so what we're doing is we're going to be targeting via geoframing by finding the people through their devices that have been in art galleries, that have gone to certain concerts, that have gone to bookstores. So people that are going to spend certain money, people that have gone to wine stores. So geoframing is able to then frame that data, frame that person. Obviously, the direct data doesn't, it's still third party. And so what we're going to then do is be able to send a message. Send that trailer, send that that content to people. Those are the people that want to buy tickets, and then we take it to the next step. We're also able to cross-reference through the geoframing technology to find the people that have purchased a ticket to a movie within the last 3 weeks or the last 3 months. So we're going to develop that data, and then I was going to say the other thing in terms of storytelling. Persephoné, you mentioned, not every brand might think they should have their own app. A lot of brands might think, what am I doing within this app and advertising? But I think that's where, if we look back to every type of media, advertising and media, whether you call it branded content or native advertising, if you could integrate naturally within the app, and we were talking about all of our kids are playing team sports, and it sounds like John and I are going to be probably within a couple miles of each other in Flemington, New Jersey, at our respective kids' sports on Sunday. So
They're going to be geoframing you.
They're going to both of us.
They already
together.
are.
Yeah.
So I'm on Team Snap, 4 or 5 hours a day checking things. So what Team Snap has done a good job at is feeding, a Domino's pizza or a Subway restaurant ad in there. They're starting to build some branded content. So if you think about the branded content and the very targeted, relevant ads that can be fed through certain apps, that's going to be a win as well.
Great. So I want to bring it back to the user experience again, but this time from the brand perspective. So if we can pit the user experience against the brand objective, I'd love to understand how you guys see those two coming together or maybe even competing or butting heads. John, you had mentioned earlier, I'm really stuck on this movie phone example, but you had mentioned earlier movie phone. When you get a brief like that, how would you tackle it? Would you start with the user experience? Would you start with the brand objective? And how do you marry those two together?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they have to be aligned. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, otherwise, you just got to walk away. I would say one of the things we talk about a lot in our company is trying to frame a business problem as a customer problem and bring it down to digital media really quickly, right? Your business problem might be we need more customers, or it could be we need more revenue, whatever. But you got to work from there down to what's the experience challenge that you have. Why aren't you getting there? And kind of walking across the journey. Why aren't you getting more customers? Is it breakage in the experience? Are there pain points? Do they not understand which one to get? Are they not ready to buy it? Is it too expensive? But once you start doing your research and finding the right points across the journey, you can align things back to the brand objective by and large. But no, if your user objectives are not aligned with your brand objectives, you're on the wrong team. You have to get these things aligned, and it's not a difficult thing to do. It's just you got to get things into the hands of customers quickly. You have to validate with customers and make sure you're solving the right problems, right? Not just solving the problems you can solve. And it's really about problem identification and prioritizing those things to make sure you're solving the ones that have the most value. And that's really the trickiest thing. I mean, the one currency that most people don't have enough right now is just time. I mean, budgets are one thing, but it's really time. You want to get to something quickly, so you really have to prioritize. You have to learn fast because your competitors are coming on quickly, and you just have to get to market quicker and make sure you're making the right decisions. So we spend, we have this saying in the company, it's like start smart or start over. And if you make the wrong step, particularly in anything involving technology, it's going to get really expensive really fast. So you want to make sure you're doing the right things every step of the way. And often the best way to do that is just validate with customers as frequently as you possibly can.
Great, and Jason, you mentioned this a little bit in the answer to the last question, but from an overarching storytelling perspective, is looking specifically within the app too small? Should we be looking at a larger story outside of that as well when it comes to marrying those that user experience within the app to the larger brand objectives?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We need to look beyond the phone. I mentioned when we were talking about sports earlier that down the road, who knows, the phone could be your first screen, but there's so much that happens outside the screen. We talk about retailers using apps as shouldn't be seen as a replacement for brick and mortar retail, but it should be seen as evolving and supplementing the experience. So, the retail brands that have done a great job, again, I brought up Home Depot. You go into Home Depot, or my wife goes into Sephora. She goes into Sephora when I go into Home Depot, if it's in the same place. And then, they both have very active and reliable apps that guide you through the store experience. So there's such a competition for eyeballs and for consumer dollars that it can't end, where the app ends. It needs to feed to something else.
Great. Okay, so I think I would have just one last question before we go into Q&A, and it's the age-old question of sort of art and science. So I think we know that both art and science, as in data and creative formats, et cetera, are important. It's definitely not an or question here. But from a brand perspective, where should we start? Jesse, I think your team has probably pitched this many times to many clients, so I'd love to hear where you guys would start.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we're all about the data, right? I mean, we're a pure play app company. We understand the user experience, but what sets us apart when partners buy from us is purely our data. We've built our own tech in-house. We cohort every user for every ad experience. So I actually know when a user comes in, if they're going to get a branding ad experience, if they're going to get a performance install type experience, a rewarded experience, a playable experience. Every ad that you see when you come in my app is curated through a custom playlist that we predetermined upon your arrival based upon certain touch points we have on you already, right? So that's what we sell to our partners, is that we're going to get you the right user, the right time at the right moment. And an example is if a user's already installed two and a half to 3 apps of the day, they're probably not going to install more apps. Let's not waste time showing a performance install campaign to this user. Let's move over to brand, right? Like, it's a lower CPM, but the ARPDAU will increase because I'm actually going to get the user to retain longer, stay in my app longer, create other actions, create other ad opportunities. So the ARPDAU model actually will shift. What I mean by ARPDAU, it's average revenue per daily active user, which $10 CPM is 1 penny, right? So for every $10 you make 1 penny of ARPDAU. So that's kind of how we measure it out. And that translates in our industry, in my part of the world.
John, from the creative perspective, I'd love to hear.
Well,
Are
I
we
think just
gonna
from the
have a bar fight?
agency perspective, we start with wherever you are, right? I mean, you come to us and you're like, here it is, you know, and you can start with, I mean, you start with what do you know, what do we think we know, and what do we have no idea about, right? So it will be data informed, but by and large, we often say that we either start with data-driven work or we start with hypothesis-driven work, right? Here's all the data we have, and we're going to do these things. Or hypothesis-driven work, we believe if we do this, this will come back. The point, though, is that you get to data quickly, right? Either just from testing an idea with customers, validating again that do they want this thing we're making, and then testing it again, can they use this thing we're making, and then launching it, is this thing we're making working? So you want to get to data quickly, but it's really, for us, it's just, you know, there's so much data we have access to. It's really about starting with the right questions, holding the narrative with small groups of people or really large enterprise global corporations, and make sure everyone's on board with what our learning agenda is, what we're trying to get to, and how that's mapping to objectives. So, I mean, if you have the data, you're there, but sometimes when you don't, you just got to start with the right questions.
Great. I think I'm actually just slightly over time, so hopefully Chuck isn't ready to kick me out. We're going to hold time for Q&A, but I think, do we still have a minute or two? We have 1 minute. So are there any burning questions you guys wanted to ask the panel?
I mean, we get complaints for ads in the app, right? So there is a moment where it's too much. We're 100% ad supported though, so if you don't like it, I guess we're the wrong app. But no, I think it's all of the above, which you talked about. There's different, and I think what I talked about the funnels and the users and there's times to give somebody a moment to potentially buy or install, right? Like performance-based or commerce-based. And then there's times to know that user's just not going to create that action at that point. And it's wasted ads, it's wasted revenue. You upset your client, you're upsetting the user because they just don't want to click on that thing anymore. So if they see a 30-second brand video, they're much happier, right? Like they get to move on their day, they learned about a great brand and they're happy. It's much lower friction, right? So I think it's incorporating all of those, but understanding by using data, go back to data, when's the right time to give one of those messages and when's the right time not to.
And I'm going to talk more generally. Probably another panel discussion at another conference for Mediapost is on OTTs, right? So if you look at all the OTTs that are being announced right now, yesterday with NBC, you know, with Peacock and Disney Plus coming out in 2 months. So again, I'll take it back to, you know, the mobile device will eventually become the first screen. So it'll be interesting to see what ad formats and the ad loads that are coming in through the OTTs, which are going to be on your phone, which I then think will impact and affect and influence what users, what consumers are willing to take in terms of advertising, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. Like, are they going to keep the phone on? And that's where I think if it's done right, you know, with Jesse's, you know, gaming, you know, and fantasy sports and other, you know, the next HQ trivias that are going to hit the market, you know, if they pay attention to what's going on, you know, with what your primary use of your phone probably will be in a year or two, which is watching TV, and we look and we learn to see what the networks and the other OTTs are putting out there in terms of ad load, you know. So I think it's a discussion that we could have in a year a year from now, which is, look, let's put all this branded content, let's start putting logos and stuff like you'll see on TV shows where there's billboards, you know, this is brought to you by this is brought to you by this, more presenting sponsorships of games. The consumers might have an appetite for that.
Steve Smith from Mediapost. John, or Jason, thank you very much for mentioning OTT. We're actually going to have an event in Montauk on November 20th through 23rd on advanced TV, including OTT. But my question of you guys, to foreshadow something that's going to come up in a couple of hours here on privacy, since data is driving so much of this, how have you already seen the impact of GDPR? What do you anticipate the impact of CCPA?
Yeah, I mean, so we're U.S. based, so GDPR didn't affect us in the same way. We do work with certain partners who are outside the U.S. In that case, we can take care of data and wash anything we need to. CCPA, it's coming up January 1st, whatever, right? It's coming right around the corner. We're getting prepared for it. Yeah, I think it's basically being able to manage data properly, right? Building systems in-house where you can take that user's data out of the data lake in a simple way, right? If they write in and say, hey, I no longer want to be tracked, I want to be found, or I want to opt out, you need mechanisms that can actually get that user out. Now, it's going to vary across the board, right? Like, there's not a one-size-fits-all for this thing because everyone's app is different and everyone collects data in different ways. But just think as you're going down the path of how am I going to, in an easy format, be able to remove that user's data, and only certain parts of that user's data has to remove, right? It's not everything in broad because there are some things that are allowed to stick around, and the law right now is still written a little high level. So let's see where it goes a little bit. They'll give you some guidance. It's not going to be right out of the box. They're not going to be able to enforce it. There's a couple of month grace period. I think we'll have some more conversations in the industry about then. We'll see what users are writing in, and we'll get more sophisticated there. But just make sure you're building systems that allow you ease to remove a user if you have to.
Yeah, I would just add on CCPA, I mean, we are doing work with some of our clients right now. Everyone's just trying to figure it out. It came out pretty quick, and I can tell you that the things that we are working on are being reviewed at the highest levels. So their organizations, they're all paying attention to it and trying to figure out just data transparency and the right sort of things to deal with their privacy policies and that sort of stuff. So it's being paid attention to. I think a lot of people are just learning it pretty quickly to try to get things and experiences prepared in time for in January, basically.
Any other questions? We have a microphone which we can get you. Just raise your hand. And if you do, for the whole day, just please tell us who you are and the company you're with, and we'll go from there. Any other questions?